Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello, everybody. This is Sean Martin, host of Redefining Cybersecurity podcast here on ITSPmagazine. And I'm flying solo today for one of our chats on the road to RSA Conference in San Francisco. It's coming up, the event, and there's a lot going on. And one of the things that I think it's been on the topic list of topics for a few years now is software bill of materials. And I'm always keeping an eye on this topic on social media and elsewhere. And I came across a tweet. Good old social media triggered something from our good friend Allan Friedman at CISA, who's on with us. Allan, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
And your tweet basically said you were hoping to speak at RSA on SBOMs, and there was already a ton of stuff going on in this topic. And rightfully so. A lot of it's because of the work that you and the team at CISA have done over the years. And I want to thank you for that first off, but then kind of get your thoughts on what prompted you to put that tweet out.
Sure. Well, we always get a little disappointed when we don't get the talk accepted at the big flashy conference. And for me, this would be, I think, would have been 10 years in a row speaking there. We try to find new and important issues around cybersecurity policy to talk about. But, the talks I pitched didn't make it past the committee. At first, I was a little sad about that. And then when the program came out, I actually got pretty inspired because it turns out there are, probably 10 talks that are related to SBOM and then another 10 that are in the broader effort. In fact, when the conference published their sort of trends this year, one of them things that they referred to was between the open source and supply chain and focuses on hardware risk. The SBOMification of things has really taken off. And for me, that's the sign that a community has developed, is it isn't just one person from the government speaking ex cathedra. It's actually saying we've got new approaches to theory, right? What's the future going to be? We've got implementation style talks. How are people doing it? What works, what doesn't? And what's the future, right? How are we going to relate this to things like AI, ML, or other parts of the supply chain world? So it's, the positive spin is, even though I don't get the nice little speaker ribbon, there's a lot of great things going on at RSA and around RSA around the idea that really shouldn't be that shocking in 2023, which is, hey, maybe we should know what's in our software.
Just a minor point of understanding that we need there. So before, and I wanted to talk about the tweet, but before we get any further, Allan, I think a lot of our listeners probably know of you and have probably come across your work in some fashion, maybe even met you in person at some events. But some folks may be new and not know who Allan is. So maybe a few words about your journey into CISA and the work before and at CISA for the bill of materials stuff that you've been working on.
Sure. I'm Allan Friedman. I'm the guy who doesn't shut up about SBOM. And we'll talk a lot more about that. But I'm a failed professor who got suckered into joining government about 7 or 8 years ago. And a lot of that work, broadly speaking, is to say, how can the government help create better markets for security? So we sometimes talk about a market failure in security. And what can we do through the different levers that we have in government to essentially reward people who are paying attention to security and nudge along the folks to hopefully drive some change? And so I started off at Commerce, did some work on coordinated vulnerability disclosure, starting in 2015 at a time when that was still a pretty hot button topic. It was the first government initiative. We've done work on some IoT security, and then this idea of SBOM, which was not a new idea, but the work that we started at Commerce and now at CISA has been to say, how do we pull together the broad software community, people who write software, people who buy software, people who maintain software, and that's pretty much all of us these days, to make some progress. So I joined CISA a year and a half ago. It's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We're the nation's cybersecurity agency, focusing on how to defend and advance cybersecurity. And I'm a senior advisor and strategist there. I coordinate our SBOM efforts both across the US government and around the entire ecosystem, and now around the world, because this isn't just an American issue. Right? Cybersecurity is a global issue. And I also work on a number of other related issues around vulnerability management, open source software, and of course, helping to support our new mission around secure by design and secure by default.
So I want to get your perspective on how things have transitioned over the last few years, perhaps. Of course, cloud is not new. APIs are not new. Open source is not new, but certainly the proliferation, sorry, of APIs and microservices seem to have really taken off, where everything is connected to everything. And in there you have the open source and you have the commercial stuff and you have all these elements. How has the landscape shifted to where it's perhaps complicated matters for SBOM but also maybe the work that you've done around software bill of materials have helped to really wrangle a view of that?
Sure. So let's start by making sure that we're all on the same page on what an SBOM is. Right, it stands for Software Bill of Materials, and it's this radical idea that, as I mentioned, we should know what's in our software. And we use the analogy sometimes of a list of ingredients, and it's not a perfect analogy, but it's really helpful for a couple of reasons. One, because at the end of the day, it's about knowing what you have. And two, it's also noteworthy that a list of ingredients by itself is just a list. It's not going to inherently make things better for you. If there's someone in your family that has a deathly allergy, just the existence of a list of ingredients in the pantry won't save them. Right? If you want to stay on your 2023 diet, saying I'll only buy things with lists of ingredients won't make that happen. Vegetarian, plant-based, religious lifestyle, all of these things aren't magically done by the list of ingredients. But good luck doing any of those things without that list of ingredients. So it is a data layer that helps us think about risk. Now, to work properly, this model of software transparency at both a technical level, sorry, always fun when you get so excited about the work that your earbud pops out of your mouth.
I'm right there with you.
Your ear, brother, yes. So the right to work properly, it needs to scale for all software. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there were very few software companies and software just sat on a disk. Today, there are a couple of things, which is software is in everything, and everyone is now a software company, right? You make cars, you're a software company. You make medical devices, you're a software company. And of course, we've gotten a lot better and more efficient at creating all of these different layers in our stack. So right, the cloud native world, the containerized software world, infrastructure as code, dynamic code writing, all of these things have changed how we're doing it. And indeed, lots of great discussions about how do we secure it. And our thinking around transparency has to evolve as well. So if something's going to run on my network, well, then the case for transparency is very easy. right? It's on my network. I need to know what's in it so I know how to defend it. When we find the next vulnerability, when we find the next log4j, how do I know whether or not I'm affected? Well, an SBOM's can help because I don't want to have to call every single vendor all the time. What does that mean for cloud SaaS? That's one of the things that we're working on here at CISA, is pulling together industry experts to sort of explore what this means in different domains. So
are there different working groups? I don't know. Did you open this up to the public sector? I'm sorry, the private sector?
Definitely. So what have we done at CISA around SBOM? Are a number of things, and we can talk about some of the government side as well, but a lot of it is to say, hey, we need to enhance and refine this. So we started off by saying, what's an SBOM? And people had ideas in their heads, but what we did at NTIA was have everyone come together and say, this is the basics, this is the minimum elements or the minimum viable product of an SBOM, of what we mean. And it turns out, so that's been very powerful. It means that we've been able to make a lot of progress. And over the last couple of years, there are dozens of companies that have grown up to help create SBOMs, manage SBOMs, consume SBOMs, dozens of open source projects and companies that are creating open source tools. But we still need to understand and enhance and refine this. So at CISA, we're focusing on how do we scale this and how do we refine the concept to apply to new domains or domains that may not be a perfect fit. That includes things like firmware. Is there a difference between firmware and software? Cloud and other things. So we have 5 working groups that are all industry-led. They're supported by the community. They're open to everyone. We've got people participating from around the world, including one very dedicated guy from the Japanese National CERT who chimes in at God knows what time of night for him, as well as companies around the world representing all sorts of different sectors. And of course, people from the open source world, because again, we're thinking about dependencies. More and more of our software is based on open source. So there are a bunch of different topics. If you want to know more, I encourage folks to check out cisa.gov/SBOM. We're talking about a range of fun issues, everything from how do we help people get started, right? What are the on-ramps and adoption, to how do we move this stuff around? So we don't really have great solutions today for sharing supply chain metadata down a complex supply chain. When I have medical devices on a hospital network, how do I figure out what's in them? If I'm worried about what's in a modern product and I want to see all the way up the supply chain, how do we get visibility? And so thinking about that sharing is a key piece as well.
Yeah, and as you talk scale, I mean, I built enterprise software for a big yellow company for many years, and scale always meant how do you get that multinational organization secure with all those endpoints and servers and IoT, whatever else was on their networks and their partners and everything. But scale in this sense to me also means scaling down to the small shops that don't have big security teams, if any, let alone proper processes and staffing and skills to actually do this stuff. So how do you help some of where most of the organizations sit in the small medium business arena to help understand this? I like the concept of MVP. I don't know if there's something there that you're doing to kind of help scale this down so that everybody can absorb it.
Yeah. So let's talk more first broadly about the question of scaling broadly in cybersecurity. And there are lots of issues that start off as specialized key topics for, we'll say, the haves in cybersecurity. Nothing unique about supply chain or security assurance for this. Let's look at something like threat intelligence, right? That used to be something that 8 companies in the world could have, and they'd specialized employees. And then we had some companies roll out, and people started to meet the needs. And now it's not something that everyone in the world is going to have threat intelligence, but that's something that now is a basic part of building a quality security program. right? This is a trickle-down effect. Now, there are always going to be organizations that are lagging, right? We don't have an infinite budget for security. Even well-resourced companies often fight for resources in security, especially in today's approach. And of course, as CISA's director, Jen Easterly, often talks about, the target-rich cyber poor, right? Organizations that are vitally important to our way of life, keeping the water on, keeping the lights on, hospitals, schools, and we want to help them. But on the specific question of SBOM, there are a couple of paths forward. For the people who produce software, small might actually be an advantage, right? If you're a small new company, maybe you don't have the world's most sophisticated DevSecOps model, but chances are you're using new tools. Chances are you have something that looks a little bit like a CI/CD pipeline. You might even be sort of building some cloud native behavior, some containerization behavior. And SBOM is easier as you move into that space. And a lot of the tools that we all use have the potential to have SBOM baked into them. So there's a command in Docker called SBOM. You know what it does, Sean? Gives you an SBOM. GitHub just rolled out an automatic SBOM generation feature for free for public repos. So the smaller organizations are at a little advantage compared to the big legacy companies. And I'm even talking about the tech giants, which have so many different products, right? If you're a manufacturer, global manufacturer, you have dozens of different divisions. Maybe you don't have a security team that spans across them. Everyone's sort of in their own silo. You got a lot of legacy products and a lot of legacy processes that you're going to have to adapt. So, for example, I talked to Lisa Bradley from Dell, who is doing amazing work in her organization of getting visibility. But she gets annoyed when I say, hey, a single command will do this for you, because, right, her organization is very well optimized for producing quality software. Not paid by Dell to say that, of course. We don't endorse Dell or particularly say they're, anything one way or the other. But we just want to acknowledge that, right, larger organizations are trying to get visibility in a way that involves bringing together many different companies, many different parts of an organization. So one last story here. I've talked to one of the senior product security leads for a very large manufacturer in the energy space. And she said, if we had SBOM today across our company, it would save us thousands of human hours a year. Because every time a new vulnerability comes along, they have to say, are our customers affected, right? That's what a good product security team does. And we need automation in that space. SBOM won't solve that problem, but SBOM drives automation that allows us to do that faster and more efficiently.
Yeah, you need the data to make those decisions, and certainly you can't make the decision, or you can't automate a decision if you don't have the decision made with some validation.
Exactly.
I love that, and you're preaching to the choir. It's often something I talk about on my show, that if you could just change the way you do something up front, you can reduce the exposure, limit the risk, and ultimately downstream save people time from having to patch stuff, or make it easier to patch stuff if you know what's going on. Let's move a little to what's going on at the conference. So I know when I did a search, you rattled off some numbers, but I captured 5 sessions on SBOM, 28 on supply chain, 22 on open source. I didn't get into the hardware security search. I'm sure there's probably a good dozen in that space as well. I don't know how we want to take this. I'll kind of take your lead, but one way for me to kind of look at this is maturity level. So folks just getting into the world of managing software components, where might they start and then move up? Or if there's interesting topics or sessions, I'll kind of leave it to you to maybe highlight some of the things that you're excited about seeing on the agenda that you think would be worthwhile for folks to take up?
Sure, and right, always tricky to do this because right, you don't want to ignore your friends' talks. So I'll flag
We'll throw Josh
two
out
that
there
are.
first. That's all right.
Oh yeah,
I'll
right.
take that. I'll take that, and then you
Sure.
can blame me.
Well, so I think that's a great one of sort of the intersection of technology and policy. Is Josh Corman is going to give a talk where he sort of says, let's look at the political side of transparency. Who's concerned about this, and then go through some of the more common concerns and the risks of transparency, and see which ones are valid that we collectively need to address and which ones may be, FUD or people playing for time because they don't want to show the world that their product has some technical debt in it, or they don't want the cost they don't want to underwrite the one-time cost of getting transparency. So I think that's going to be a really interesting talk. I'm looking forward to sort of think through and in hearing his perspective, because Josh is an excellent big picture approach. Another more general talk that is, I think, going to be getting into some of the mechanics is a talk by Chris Blask, who's been in security for a long time, and I think is now supporting Cybeats, and a woman named Kate Stewart, who's vice president of the Linux Foundation, and they're going to be doing a little bit of peering into the future of saying, hey, the world on SBOMs is the name of their talk, and sort of talk about, hey, what are some of the real benefits and use cases, and what are some of the things we can anticipate? Because again, what I love about this idea of SBOM is it's a brand new data layer. And right, let's use a more historic example. CVEs don't fix a thing, right? Giving a vulnerability a CVE number doesn't protect anyone, right? It's just assigning a vulnerability a string. But because we have that program and because we have things like the NVD, now we have an entire ecosystem of tools that are built on it that organizations can pull together, and tool A supports tool B, supports tool C, or you just write one giant check to one particular major sponsor of RSA and they'll solve all your problems. But the vision is we have a thriving ecosystem. And I think that's a vision that I'm really excited. Both Kate and Chris have been right about a lot of things. Kate was involved in creating one of the two major SBOM standards called SPDX, which along with Cyclone DX are sort of the two ways that we implement this. SPDX is older, and Kate had the foresight to realize we need machine readable ways of thinking about open source licensing. And Chris has also been sort of looking ahead. So I'm really excited about that as a historical approach. And then, so yeah, those are the two talks that I'm sort of more excited. There are a couple of interesting panels that are also going to be sort of thinking about at the corporate level and at the technical level. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we're certainly not here to recite all the sessions because there are far too many. So I'm not going to make you do that. And I'm going to encourage. We'll put links in the notes for people. I've done the search, and we'll make that part easy for them. There are a couple other things I wanted your thoughts on these few points. Kind of where SBOM fits into the security program. I think there's a natural. It goes in DevOps, DevSecOps, but how does it fit into cloud security and containerization versus patch management and risk management versus detection and response and recovery? Any thoughts on that? And
Sure.
I don't know if there are any sessions that kind of highlight that I think that would be interesting as well, but not necessarily if you don't have them at the tip of your tongue.
So we like to use three buckets to think about how SBOM can really drive change, right? How do you go from data to intelligence to action? First is the producing of software, whether it's developers or the product team leads, just visibility into what you have, know what you ship. And this isn't just good for security. This is good for quality and cost as well. There's a supplier in the sort of OT space that thinks about SBOMs, and they've done analysis and teardowns of some very large product systems. And some of these major vendors that maybe come from companies that we're not super friendly with are shipping, 6, 7 versions of the same piece of software. That's just code bloat. That's inefficient. That raises your total cost of ownership. And so again, security is important, but it's also a quality story. And Sean, I know you know this, that modern DevOps, actually, the security in the software world kind of stole that from heavy industry. And they've really had to invest in quality and quality process to be globally efficient. And so we've seen that spill over through Gene Kim's work and everyone else into the DevOps domain. So that's the production side. And then there's the decision side, right? We all either buy software or select open source software that we're going to run in our organizations. Before we make that decision, there are a lot of things we're going to want to look at. Obviously, the economics, but the security risk. And so one is, do I want to buy from someone who can't produce an SBOM? Think about what that means. If there's a company who's selling you a product and they can't actually give you an SBOM, how can you trust that organization? And why can't they do it? Is it just they know what it is, but it's kept in their own internal data format? Or is it that they just have a bunch of teams going rogue and they pull things together? This also allows you to think about
Coca-Cola formula, Allan.
Yeah. Well, and some of it is proprietary, and that's fine, and we have solutions for that. But it also allows you to sort of do the risks that you care about. Are you worried about open source risk and unsupported open source? Are you worried about existing vulnerabilities? Are you worried about nation states being in your supply chain when you think your regulator may ask you to take certain things out? So there's a lot of stuff that goes into the sort of supply chain risk management pre-purchase. And then the last piece of what you're going to do with an SBOM and what tools you're going to have is, hey, once I have an SBOM, what do you do with it? Now, I'll acknowledge that's a new issue right now because until recently, no one had SBOMs. So it'd be kind of weird if we had a bunch of SBOM tools, right? But we're starting to see that fit in to different types of tools that organizations are already using, as well as new startups that are rolling out plans to manage the SBOM data for you and then integrate it into things we're already doing. One of the things that I'm looking forward to at RSA is talking with a lot of the suppliers in the vendor management, in the vulnerability management space, and in the asset management space, and in the config management space. Because again, these are services that a lot of companies are already paying for. So let's talk about how we can integrate SBOM data into it. So not only do I see, is there a vulnerability in, this blinking box that's vital for my business to operate? But maybe there isn't a CVE against this because there's only 1,000 customers. But I do care about, are they using an out-of-date crypto library? Are there libraries here that are vulnerable to RCEs and things like that? So I think looking ahead, we're going to see a lot of folks in the expo hall having SBOM on their marketing literature. And I got to tell you, I've got mixed feelings about that. On one hand, it's nice to see. On the other hand, InfoSec marketing always makes us all feel a little dirty.
Yeah. Well, we won't go there, but I know what you're saying. This, as you were talking, and I'm thinking of that chain that you were describing, those three buckets, and there's a fourth step, the last mile, I'll call it, to the consumer. And this is coming out of left field, but I've seen some talks on this as well, where NIST has done some work on, you called it ingredients, but what are the elements in the product and then providing that to the consumer. So I don't know, again, this is out of left field. So if you don't have a response to this at the moment, that's fine. But any collaboration with NIST to cover that last mile to say the SBOM turns into the software stuff that gets presented to a consumer when they buy?
So great question. And, who's the target audience? Who should be making these decisions? There's a lot of work happening all across the government. around things like IoT labeling and really what drives change. So one thing is to push it all the way to the human who is who's making things in home goods. I think SBOM might eventually reach there, but right now this is very much a broader business risk, in part because those are the organizations that are empowered to make that decision, rather than the bank to make that decision, rather than the bank's customer to say, hey, is my bank safe? We want the bank to do it. So the director of CISA, Jen Easterly, gave a talk at Carnegie Mellon University about a month ago, where she rolled out CISA's secure by design and secure by default model. And the title of her talk was Unsafe at Any CPU Speed. And it asks the question, why, just as 40 years ago, we said, hey, why are car companies allowed to sell things that when they take a turn wrong, blow up? And similarly, we're starting to ask the question, hey, why are there lots of IT products that when you buy them are inherently insecure? We know there's always going to be risk. Zero risk is not a goal, and everyone in the cybersecurity world knows this. But at very least, we can start asking, why are things out of the box not secure? Why don't they have key common features? Now, we're starting to push this a number of ways across the administration. The president's executive order in 2021 laid out in Section 4 of that executive order. It's a long executive order. Section 4 said, hey, for the government to buy it, you got to have these properties. You got to have MFA enabled in your dev environment. You got to have a separate dev environment from your build environment, right? Not impossible things, and things that like good security people don't understand why we don't already have. And one of those is SBOM. But there's some other features there. And so coming back to your question, what do we want to do is we want to create a world where for the end consumers who are not in a position to secure things, let's work on making things secure out of the box, having common security properties. For organizations that are in a position to make risk decisions about the software they buy, let's give them the transparency, the data to make those decisions, and to make those decisions more cheaply and more easily. And that's really the idea behind SBOM and our broader agenda around things like VEX, rethinking vulnerability data spaces, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason I asked, one is in my mind, so I have to ask, and Marco's not here to stop me, but just the idea of the value of security. And I think ultimately where the money is spent or not spent, if we're supporting the companies that take it seriously and make the investments versus the ones that can't prove that they do things the right way, quote unquote, the right way, they don't earn our money, and therefore they don't exist. Maybe that's a little utopian view there, but anyway, that's kind of why I was going with that. Let's look at the future. Let's bust out the crystal ball now, because there are a few sessions there on the list that make me wonder, is it the current state of where we are managing SBOMs, or is it a future state? And let's just go to it. It's AI, right? So I know, and certainly with generative AI,
Sure.
there's a lot of conversation right now, which isn't necessarily the same thing as AI and these types of situations. But what's the future hold? How far can we get? Obviously, that's going to be helpful in decision making and automation and orchestration, those types of things. But what's the future hold with that and other things?
Sure. So one of the things that's become gratifying as we sort of see the idea of SBOM go from what is this to dear God, we can't do that, to okay, this seems like part of the future, is the expansion of the idea of transparency into other domains. So you talked about AI ML. As we think about the risks and the concerns and the power, knowing what's in these engines is going to be key. And so there's already some work happening on what transparency means in the AI ML context. Berkeley and Stanford have a joint project on this. There's some great work at Indiana University thinking about what an SBOM means for modern generative AI platforms. You know, how do we track the data separately from the network generation process, from, you know, the test assessment software and things like that. Hardware is obviously something that a lot of people care about, especially in the national security context. If you thought SBOM was hard, wait till you look at hardware. And that's something, you know, I've got a lot of friends in the hardware space, and they always are, you know, looking at me as a software guy saying, "Oh, you sweet summer child." And in transparency, that's going to be key, which is, but it's also really hard. There are a number of people who say, "Oh, we can already do hardware supply chain and hardware SBOMs or HBOMs." And sadly, I don't think you can. We'll get there, but you can take the hash of a software library. We can track the pedigree and provenance of open source. Can't take a hash of a DIM. And tracking a SKU, a product number inside a company, is very different than saying I can follow that product across a bunch of different organizational boundaries. So we'll get there, but this is something that we're slowly working on. And what I want to do is also focus on linking it rather than building one bomb to rule them all. Let's say, let's focus on saying, let's build out individual capacity. And then if you want to put them all in the same file, that's great. But there's a lot of reason why we should be tracking this data separately, because different data is going to change at different times, right? Vulnerability data evolves. And we're going to want to sort of be able to map whatever data we're looking at to different types of risk.
Nice. And another maybe off the wall question, the role of blockchain. Because I don't know if there's any value. I mean, you need to have integrity, right?
So
in the SBOM, I don't know if blockchain helps solve that or what.
Here's where I'm going to run very close to making my press person a little terrified. So I'm speaking for myself and not for CISA. But I've been pretty outspoken in my skepticism for ledger technology. One, because it has been the next big thing for 10 years. And I think at a certain point, you don't get to be the brand new special belle of the ball if you haven't produced anything meaningful in 10 years, despite a ridiculous amount of money. And a huge number of companies says blockchain will solve this. And then they realize it can't. And there are a bunch of reasons why, including scaling issues, and including the fact that once you layer the security pieces on to your DLT, then you're like, oh, well, we need a PKI anyway, so we don't have any of the savings that come from making things truly distributed. There are a couple companies out there that have been doing this, and they're full of very smart people, but I think the requirements of what are needed can't just be solved by magical separation. I'm not going to rule it out that the solution won't be something that is a distributed ledger. But the distributed ledger by itself won't solve all of our problems. You know, sprinkle a little blockchain on it. Hasn't worked for just about anything. It won't work here.
Yeah, I appreciate your candor there, and yeah, who knows where things will go.
Right.
And I won't even go down yeah, there's no need to go down other paths. But well, listen, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. It's great to get your insight in all this stuff, and I want to thank you for all the work you've done leading up to your current role at CISA and bringing the community together to move things forward. Lots to do still, of course, and I want to say that we only scratched the surface here. One, there are plenty of sessions right on this topic. I'll include links for that. But more importantly, perhaps in the notes, we'll have Allan's profile. You connect with them on social media where he wants that to happen. And CISA will be at RSA. I believe they'll have a booth there. So I would encourage everybody to stop by, say hello, ask a few questions that are relevant for you and your organization, and perhaps even contribute, become part of a working group, and help move things forward so that you're heard as part of this solution.
And if anyone is interested in learning more, we have a nice handy email address, sbom@cisa.dhs.gov, to learn more if you want a briefing for your organization. And if you want to see some great available resources, cisa.gov/SBOM. Stop by our booth at RSA. And at the risk of getting a little too far for the plugin, we're always hiring. We need really smart people who are committed to a cybersecurity mission, who want to help secure the nation. And we have a lot of interesting roles. So again, if that's the sort of thing that you're interested in, stop by our booth at RSA.
I love it. I've thought about it many times.
We'd love to have you, Sean. Come on, be a senior advisor.
That'd be fun.
Help us shape the future.
Someone
from your perspective.
I'm here doing podcasts, spreading the word for everybody.
Excellent.
But an absolute pleasure, Allan, and look forward to seeing you and the rest of the team there in San Francisco. And appreciate you being part of this. And for everybody listening, as I mentioned, tons of links to tons of good stuff. And stay tuned as we continue our coverage for RSA Conference 2023. Thanks, Allan. Thanks, everybody.
See you all at Moscone. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.